Shalom, good afternoon from Jerusalem, Israel. This is Mr. Lowell Joseph Gallen, founder of the Root and Branch Association Limited, established in the United States of God of Israel, bless America, in New York State in 1981, and now celebrating our 41st year. Today is Monday, August 15, 2022. In the Gregorian calendar, and the 18th day of the 5th Israelite Hebrew month of Av in the Hebrew Israelite calendar year 5782, our Shemitah sabbatical year. Welcome to episode 10 of our monthly Root and Branch Association Fellowship seminars, chaired by Fellowship Chairman Yair Davidiy, founder of Hebrew Nations and Brit-Am. Today, we have a double session. We will have two recordings. First, Yair will be giving a talk, and then Steve Matha will give a talk. And we welcome our guest, Mr. David Plumley from near London, in England's green and pleasant land. Well, once it was green and pleasant, hopefully it will be again. And Steve Matha from somewhere near San Diego. So now, without further ado, let me hand over the mic to Mr. Davidiy for the first of our two talks. Yair, it's all yours.
Okay, shalom. I represent Brit-Am, Hebrew Awareness, a movement that looks for where the Austrian tribes are. We concentrate upon the Western peoples as we find the descendants of Austrian tribes mostly to be. And we bring proofs from numerous fields, from the Bible, from rabbinical sources, from history, from linguistics, from mythology, for comparative sociology, anthropology, anything which somehow has something to say on the subject. We look at it and we have found proofs in every relevant fields, and we show how these proofs from the different fields, different areas of studies link up, coincide with each other, coordinate each other, and complement each other. So that is what we believe in, the Austrian tribes amongst Western peoples. A major proof, or the proof that we consider to be most important, is the Bible. We find it through the different sections of the Bible. The Bible begins with Genesis, the 5 books of Moses. That is the main section of the Bible, according to our belief. But nevertheless, also the prophets. The prophets also have much to say on the subject. So we decided for this particular talk to concentrate more on the prophets, what the prophets say. And since I've been recently studying a little the Book of Obadiah, I propose that we briefly go through the Book of Obadiah because there is something to say, lost in tribes. Then maybe we take a few questions or comments, and then according to the time we have, we can go start or begin to go through some of the other books of the Bible, the prophetical section of the Bible. So Obadiah, the prophet Obadiah, is he has the shortest book in the Bible. When I started to learn the Bible in a serious way, that was the first one I read. I went into because it was the one I could get a handle on, and that was also a propitious choice because there's much to say that is pertinent, especially when the different commentators or traditions surrounding it are taking into cognizance. Obadiah is mentioned in the Bible, or a servant of King Ahab named Obadiah is mentioned in the Bible, and the sages identified this Obadiah with the same one who wrote the prophet, this work, the book in the Bible, the book of Obadiah. And according to tradition, he himself was a convert. He was a convert from Edom. It's a tradition that usually a convert does not become a prophet, cannot become a prophet. He lacks a certain level to reach unto. But they say Obadiah was an exception. For every rule there's an exception. So too in this case, Obadiah became a prophet. And Obadiah prophesied against his own people. And he prophesied against Edom. And who was Edom? In the beginning, we had Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. They founded the Hebrew nation. Jacob was the son of Isaac. Isaac also gave birth to Esau. Esau and Jacob were the two sons, the twin sons of Isaac. Jacob was renamed Israel. Esau was renamed Edom. And they were brothers, and Jacob supplanted, at least according to the symbol meaning of the Bible, he supplanted Esau, and he received the primary blessing. And he always had that enmity. He was antagonistic to the Israelite nation. And according to prophecy, throughout prophecy, he would continue to be so. And conventional history tells us, also the Bible gives us this indication, that the people of Edom, they founded a small kingdom that was sometimes powerful, but always relatively small, so, to the south, and later to the southeast of Judah and the southeast of Israel, called Edom. The name was also called Edom. It's also in the Roman times it's known as Idumea. But in addition to that, we found elements, and the Bible in Genesis itself indicates this concerning the champions of Esau, that they were spread throughout the Middle East, that they were in effect elite warrior elements that were spread through numerous kingdoms, and often they took over those kingdoms. And according to tradition, they founded many different kingdoms, many different rulerships, and they became important in the foundation of Sparta, of Rome, of Russia, of Germany, and of other places. We have written 2 books on this subject, listing all the places and explaining it, and so on. And Esau, that is Edom, will also be important in the end times. So Obadiah prophesied concerning Esau in the end times. And the vision of Obadiah, he calls out to the nations to come and take vengeance on Edom. Edom has set herself up like an eagle ruling over all of the nations. And today we have the USA is represented by an eagle, but that is on the side of Israel. On the other side, we have numerous other nations that have been important that were also represented by an eagle. Ancient Rome was represented by an eagle. Russia was represented by an eagle. The German Empire, the Second and Third Reichs were both represented by an eagle. Poland was represented by an eagle. Numerous nations were represented by an eagle. An eagle has been a representative of power in the world on many different occasions. At all events, one of these pertains to Edom, and Obadiah compares Edom to an eagle that is the king of the birds of the sky, and he sets himself up in a high place, and he says that he will rule over everyone. In the end times, a call will go out to come to just take vengeance on Edom for the evil that he has done to other peoples of the earth. And he says that you set yourself up in the rocks, and you became, you thought you were mighty, and you will be destroyed. He goes into the details of it. He mentions Teman. Teman was another group. The Temanib, also known in ancient history, they were in several different kingdoms. They were an offshoot of Edom, of Esau. And he also mentions that Esau was not loyal, did not have fraternity, did not have a feeling of fraternity towards the children of Israel or to the Jews. Remember that the Israelite nation were 12 tribes. These 12 tribes divided into 2 different sections. The southern section was comprised of Judah, Benjamin, Levi, and minority representatives of the other tribes. Whereas the northern section, known as Israel, sometimes known as Samaria, sometimes referred to as Joseph or Ephraim, according to the context. The northern section comprised 10 tribes, and these 10 tribes were taken away into exile, and they were lost. They became the lost 10 tribes of Israel. But nevertheless, they are mentioned very frequently in prophecy. Prophecy often mentions them, and they became the lost in tribes and were destined to play an important part in world history. And the Bible mentions it, and the prophecies to Abraham also mentioned that this was a task given to the Israelite nation. In addition to keeping the law and doing what they were supposed to do, they also had the task of elevating the nations of the earth and bringing them up to a higher level. And to do that, they had to go down. They had to go down to a lower depth. And this is, in a sense, why they were exiled. The northern section was exiled, and it lost consciousness of its awareness, consciousness of its ancestry, and it became like the Gentiles, but it eventually evolved upwards, and it did through the nations that came out of it. To the nations that came out of it, we had most nations that have helped elevate the Western world have had a serious input from the lost 10 tribes. Even, friends, we find a section of the lost 10 tribes, as the Book of Obadiah mentions, or rather commentaries to the Book of Obadiah mentioned. France was important. France had an important early civilization in Western history. France, under Charlemagne, helped, in effect, elevate all of Europe. They had the German barbarism ruled over Europe. Charlemagne came along, and he himself was one of them, but he was friendly to the Jews, and he installed civilizing codes of conduct, and he reformed all of the civilized world in his time. And the laws and principles that Charlemagne and his successors of his blood laid down continued for a good many years. And even when they departed from them, as they frequently did, that was the standard that they would return to. And on the whole, France did have a civilizing influence throughout its history. Even under the French Revolution and the principles of Napoleon, so they had imperial ambitions. They were the English fought a war with them, and so on. But nevertheless, Napoleon also brought a spirit of reform to all the world. Wherever Napoleon went, he pulled down the walls of the ghettos. He established the principles of equality, fraternity, and liberty, a universal standards of basic human behavior and of rationalization of science, of scientific inquiry, of basic attitudes. And this came about through the French Revolution that Napoleon helped further. And also after that, we had the French Empire, the French colonial empire, which, despite many things for which it can be criticized, as can the British Empire also be criticized, on the whole, they were a civilizing influence, and they helped the peoples that they ruled over advance. Relative to the alternative, they were a step forward for mankind. And that was the French. Also had the Dutch. The Dutch also, we find a good portion of the lost in tribes amongst the Dutch. They too had their empire. They too did things similar, set an example and helped colonize other people. And also through the example of the way they live and so on, they too have had an influence upon the mankind. So in their own way of the Scandinavians, amongst whom we also find members of the lost in tribes, and the Swiss, and especially the British and the British Empire and the USA in its own way. And even today, that is the standard. The USA sets the standard, the moral standard for mankind, for the Gentiles. If something is wrong anywhere in the world, the chances are no one will do anything about it. For instance, we have the Uyghurs in China are being virtually exterminated. No one is doing anything about it because no one wants to confront the Chinese. But if anyone is ever going to do anything about it, or is any change that is going to be made, it will come through the Americans. It will come through these. They are the conscious. They are the battle axe of the Almighty, on the side of good, as Jeremiah described them. And this is what we have. And this too is what the Book of Obadiah is referring to. And he refers to the downfall of Edom, and that Edom will be punished for having betrayed Israel, that is the 10 tribes, and also because he killed the Jews. And we find elements of Edom amongst the Nazis, amongst people who throughout history persecuted the Jews. Many of them were descended from Edom, and apparently for reasons of his own, the Almighty does not want Judah to take the major role in taking a vengeance for this, but Joseph will. Joseph will be the agent of the Almighty in taking vengeance for these deeds. And that's what Obadiah says. The prophet Obadiah says this. It's not what I say. Sitting here in black and white, this is what Obadiah says. And he says that two things of importance. One point is he says in Hebrew, he says in the end times, two saviors in the plural will come up against Edom. In the plural. And according to the sages, this represents the Messiah, son of David, and the Messiah, son of Joseph. There's a tradition that the Messiah, son of David, will be the Messiah that we know of, that was promised to us, was promised to all the world. And at the beginning, he will appear amongst Judah. And there will also be a Messiah, son of Joseph, who, according to the Malbim and other sources, will come and lead the 10 tribes back and bring the 10 tribes back and initiate their reunion with Judah, and also take vengeance upon the Goyim, upon the Gentiles who will try and destroy Judah, who will be the enemies of civilization. The Messiah, son of Joseph, will also come against them. And also he will help the Jews rebuild the land. So this will happen in the future, but nevertheless we see indications of this. We see the potential for this to happen when you consider the British. The British helped bring the Jews back to Palestine, and the British helped, and also towards the end they also tried to impede it. They tried to renege to some degree on their agreement, but on the whole, they were positive, and they did more than anyone else did. When the British took over Palestine in 1920, there were 30,000 Jews in Palestine under the Ottoman Empire. The white paper came about after the Arabs had a 6-year revolt against the Jews, killing Jews, wanting to throw the Jews out of Palestine. And the British suppressed the Arab revolt ruthlessly, with great efficiency, more than the Jews would have been capable of doing. 1 in every 4 Arabs was either killed or injured. So the British did really take matters in hand, and they did protect the Jews. But after that, because of world opinion, because of different things, also because of a change of opinion and the winds of change that were blowing from Germany, Nazi Germany, and growing anti-Semitism, and a change of rulership, one could say, in Britain, a more anti-Jewish attitude. They introduced a white paper that limited, did not restrict, did not negate, but limited the number of Jews who could come into Palestine. And under the circumstances, we don't know if the Jewish government would have done any different if it was faced with the same situation. At all events, when the white paper came into existence, there were 335,000 or more Jews it had grown from between 1920 to 1931, 1933. The number of Jews in the land of Israel had grown to 335,000. Then they introduced a white paper, and the white paper continued to be in effect, but Jews kept coming. Even during the Second World War, Jews kept coming, and the British tried to prevent them, but they weren't really enthusiastic about the Royal Navy was not really enthusiastic about using all its abilities to do so. So that in 1945 or before then, the number of Jews was already 450,000. 450,000 Jews, in other words, the number of Jews had increased to 450,000. More than 150,000 Jews had come to Palestine during the Shoah, and that was 3 times more than went to any other place. So Palestine under the British had served as a a place of refuge for the Jews, despite all the criticisms that we can level about it, against it. And 3 years later, they were still under the British. At the time when the war of 1948 broke out, there were almost 600,000 Jews in the country. So the British did much more for the Jews than they did for the Arabs. Some of them also pro-Arab, and some of them weren't. And a lot of even as far as I'm concerned, even one Jew wanted to come to the land of Israel and couldn't do so because he was prevented by others. That is a crime. That is a sin that cannot be forgiven. But nevertheless, on the big picture, in its perspective, it wasn't as bad as it could have been, and on the whole, it was very positive. So this too was an action of Joseph. He identified the British with Joseph, with Ephraim especially, the USA with Manasseh, but also many from Ephraim amongst them. After the British Israel received independence for a while, France, Reuben, also from the 10 tribes, somebody from the 10 tribes, amongst the French and other nations, all of the friends of Israel, the Dutch, the Norwegians for a while, the Danish, for a while they all helped Israel. Now they didn't, but when Israel needed it, they were helping us. And after that, the USA took over and began to bankroll Israel and to help us and to help Israel sustain itself. And that is the role of Joseph. That is the role predicted for Joseph, that the Mashiach ben Joseph would fulfill. And that is where we find the attitude, the spirit of Mashiach ben Joseph acting and coming to play amongst Gentile nations. So this is hinted at in the book of Obadiah and also in rabbinical traditions. It also says, Obadiah says, he says that Galut Ahelazeh, I read in Hebrew because the English translation is a little bit different. I read in the Hebrew, and I'll tell you what the literal translation is. This first exile is often translated as the exile of this host, but literally in Hebrew it says, Galut Ahelazeh means this first exile. This first exile, according to the rabbinical commentators, all of them, in fact, Rashi, Radak, Ibn Ezra, Malbim. This first exile means the exile of the lost 10 tribes. You had the 10 tribes of Israel divided from Judah, as we mentioned. The Assyrians came and they conquered the 10 tribes and took them all into exile. And more than 100 years later, the Babylonians came and took away Judah and took them to Babylon, and they came back. And then later on, the Jews were taken away once again by the Romans. So you had several stages of exile, but the very first exile, that Obadiah is talking about, was that of the 10 tribes. So he says this first exile, good of the children of Israel, Asher Kananim ad Zarafat. Asher Kananim ad Zarafat, Kananim, according to Ibn Ezra and Radak and others, that elements from Canaan, from the Sidonim, Phoenicians, from Carthage. Carthage was also descended from Canaanites. They set up Punic civilization. The traces Theo Brit-Am has shown how there were linguistic traits found amongst the ancient Germanic peoples, and he has tried to prove, he has a whole group of people following him in academia, tried to prove that they did set up some type of contacts and they did have some type of attempted colonization in what is now Germany. We also find names in Ptolemy that seem to confirm this, and also the Ibn Ezra quotes a tradition that the Canaanites are the Germans. Whereas Zarafat, according to Rashi and the others, Zarafat means France. And also in modern Hebrew, Zarafat is a name for France. Zarafat is a name for France. Rashi mentions Zarafat, and they say that this, according to Rashi, these are the 10 tribes who went to Zarafat, which is the kingdom we call France. That's what Rashi says. And Rashi was the most important commentator in the Jewish religion. Everyone who learns begins to learn. Anyone is almost a religious obligation. Every week, read the portion of the weekly portion that read in the Beit Knesset, in the synagogue with Rashi. Every child that begins to learn, he learns with Rashi. Anyone who begins to learn Talmud, they can't get by without Rashi. You have a difficult question, the first place you go is to Rashi. Rashi is the most authoritative. Rashi is also usually the one who gives the answer that is most acceptable. Right? It seems that mitkabel al hadat, that you recognize as logical and correct. So Rashi is probably the most revered commentator that exists. And Rashi says that the lost 10 tribes went to France. And the others unto Canaan, and the others say were included the area from France up unto Germany, according to this. Also, other traditions say this included Belgium, Holland, and the other areas, and to the Abarbanel says it also includes England. That England, Angleterre, calls it Angleterre, was included in the definition of Zarephath. But there too, they were to be found. Whereas Nachmanides Ramban, also one of the most esteemed commentators of them all, brings this verse in Obadiah as proof that the lost 10 tribes were exiled, have not yet returned. That all the prophecies in the Bible concerning the lost 10 tribes are for the future. Because there were those who claimed that they've already been fulfilled in some way or other, and we still find claims like this. So Nachmanides brings these verses in Obadiah to prove that the lost 10 tribes are not yet returned, and they will return. And the future, the forces of Joseph, the house of Joseph, shall defeat Edom, and they are the people who are in Zarephath, which he says, which are in the far north, which is in his terminology means the areas of northern Europe. So taking everything together, we find that among these commentators saying that lost 10 tribes in effect are in areas of Western Europe. From there, and this is what we also have found from the Bible, from different books of the Bible, through prophecies concerning them, all indicating the same, straight from the literal text of the Bible. But it's good to see that the great commentators also thought along that way, and this was in the early Middle Ages, before what we now know became apparent to us. They didn't have the knowledge that we now have, but they intuitively understood it. It's not for nothing that they're considered amongst the greatest people who ever lived. These are the holy people. And they all said this. And so we have this. And this is what we have. And in addition to that, we have throughout the Bible different texts, different sections that speak of it, that confirm it, that add to it. And we'll see how our time goes. If anyone has any questions, any comments to make, we'd like to hear them now.
The first one is that it's interesting that despite Edom's long-standing hostility and antagonism towards Israel, even biblical examples, Israel are directly, or the whole tribes of Israel, are directly instructed not to despise Edom, who is their brother. So the godly approach is not to respond in the way they've been treated. God says, these are your brethren, you will not despise them. So that, they came out of the same womb, and so it's a good lesson for us there. That was the first one. I don't know if you want to just mention anything about that first. I've got about 3 or 4 others there as well.
I could say, I don't know how appropriate it is, but I could say something that over the years I've been interested in the literature concerning the Germans, concerning everything about them. And I've noticed very often that before the First World War, even before the First World War, there was a lot of negative criticism about the Germans. And one of the criticisms was that the Germans, as individuals, are admirable people. They're good companions, they're good neighbors, they're reliable, they work well, they're intelligent, and so on. But just when they all get together, as if to say there's something wrong with them, some negative aspect of their personality comes out of them. So we could take that if you are forbidden to despise an Edomite who comes to you, who wants to be part of you. So he's left his people, and he can be trusted to show this only to give evidence of this positive aspect of his personality as an individual. There could be a connection there.
Yeah, possibly. One of my later questions there is we know that after the Assyrian captivity, there's ample evidence that the 10 tribes migrated into the western north of Europe. So that's sort of settled in my mind and in many people's minds. But we also know that there's evidence that parts of Assyria, the Assyrian peoples, also migrated into Europe, and that it's possible the German-speaking peoples or the Germanic peoples are Assyrian. Or at least partly Assyrian. Is that possible?
That is possible. I know that there are schools of thought who think this, have written books on it. I have a few books here. Craig White wrote a whole book along those lines, and others did as well. And that there is a possibility about it. One other aspect that I found indications that the Edomites, the Phoenicians and the Edomites were used by the Assyrians as proxies in their colonization of other places. The prophet Amos mentions it several times. He condemns the book of Amos in the first chapter. He condemns the cities of Phoenicia for helping the exile, the lost 10 tribes. And these cities were the Philistines. The Philistines were part of a Minoan civilization, a maritime civilization, connected with Cyprus and with Crete. And also he condemns the Phoenician cities of Tyre and Zidon and other places that were also associated with Assyria. And archaeologists now, not archaeologists like a regular run-of-the-mill archaeologists, are also tending towards that line of thought that the Assyrians used Phoenicians as their emissaries, as their agents. We find as soon as the Neo-Assyrians, after the conquest of the 10 tribes, the new empire of the Assyria, they'd opened up and suddenly had an influx of silver, an influx of tin, and the price of precious products went down enormously to 1/3 of what it previously was. And I think this is because they had access to mineral resources that could only be obtained in the West. And the Phoenicians were the ones who were developing them and trading in them. And also in southeast Spain, we find new Phoenician-directed colonies that seem to be manned by settlers from the area of ancient Israel, and these in turn eventually moved to the northwest of Spain, and then they migrated to Ireland and to Britain. And so the Phoenicians are there. The Phoenicians are there, but we have not emphasized that. The Phoenicians are there. The Syrians are there. But the Assyrians are more there as people who use other nations. That the Bible seems to place more emphasis upon them. The prophets condemn the Phoenicians, the cities of Phoenicia. They condemn the Philistines, and here and there they also prophesy against Assyria. So how it all works together. And Micah, for instance, as you say, Micah chapter 5, he predicts the future destruction of Nineveh by Israel. And we believe that this took place in the time of the Scythians, who helped destroy, together with the Medes and Babylonians, helped destroy the cities of Assyria. There were Israelites amongst the Assyrians, amongst the Scythians. But usually prophecy comes into play not only as an intermediate historical level, but also once again in the end times. So how it will come about in the end times, we cannot say. But it's worth keeping in mind.
That's very, very interesting. Thank you. We know that the sons of Edom, I think, well, they called the Dukes of Edom, I think.
Exactly, the Dukes of Edom.
Yeah. So they kind of
an interesting point. An interesting point. I just saw as you brought that up. In Hebrew, it's Alufim of Edom, Edom, the Dukes. They didn't have kings; they had the rulers, leaders. Aluf in Hebrew actually means rulers, leader, leader. And in Germany, they emphasize the full principle. The leader, everyone should be a leader.
Yeah.
Our idea of the Germans, we have the Germans as being martinets, regimented people who just stand in line and do whatever they're told to do. Actually, it was just the opposite. The strength of the Germans was they tried to make everyone a little Hitler in his own right, a little person who could automatically take his own initiative and know what to do. That was what made them formidable enemies.
Yes, yeah.
That was the principle of German army, the full principle.
So we know then that Edom itself is a disparate nation as well, in various places. I've heard it said that the Philistines may be the modern Palestinians, and again they are a thorn in the side of Israel. You wonder whether that's a possibility. And of course, we know that one of the sons of Edom was Teman.
Yes,
and he was the father of the Ottomans. And of course, we know some Ottomans are in Turkey, another adversary of Israel. So it seems that wherever Edom ends up, whichever of the dukes or the tribes of Edom, wherever they end up, they seem to be in hostility against the peoples of Israel.
That was a township in southern Phoenicia, the region of southern Phoenicia, and there are those who say that Zarephath, because people from that region settled in France, the name Zarephath was given to France. So there's a tradition along those lines, so it's worth mentioning. We just mentioned, say, a few points from the Bible, from the prophets concerning the lost 10 tribes. Isaiah says it in the end times. He says, Isaiah 9, Manasseh, Ephraim, and Manasseh, together they are against Judah, for this his anger is not turned away, and his hand is stretched out still. So he speaks of a time in the future when Ephraim and Manasseh will be logheads with each other, and they'll also be logheads with Judah. So this has happened in the past, and if it happens in the future, know that also this too was prophesied. Nevertheless, there will be a return, and there will be a reconciliation. Isaiah 11 says the jealousy of Ephraim shall depart, and those who harass Judah shall be cut off. Ephraim shall not be jealous of Judah, and Judah shall not harass Ephraim. There shall be a reconciliation. And also mentions in Isaiah 11:13 in the Hebrew, it says that Judah and Ephraim together will cause the Palestinians to be flown away to the west. The Hebrew says that they will cause the Palestinians to fly away on wings towards the west. So apparently the Palestinians will be exiled by Ephraim and Judah acting together in concert at some time in the future. And this will solve the problem of the Palestinian enmity and antagonism towards the Jewish people in the land of Israel. Yeah, and it also speaks about the end times. They shall lift up their voice, they shall sing for the majesty of the Lord, they shall cry, our Lord, from the sea. Therefore glorify the Lord in the fires, in the bonfires that in the British Isles they used to light on the hillsides. Even the name of the Lord God of Israel in the isles of the sea, the isles of the sea refer to the British Isles. Isaiah chapter 49 says that the exiles of Israel will be preserved, they will become a covenant of people, so there's a Brit-Am. Brit-Am in the Middle Ages, Brit-Am was sometimes Britain. Britain was sometimes written Brit-Amia. There's another way of writing or pronouncing the word Brit-Am. So we have this almost very word Brit-Am. Literally, Brit-Am means a commonwealth of the peoples, a covenant of the peoples, and that is what Britain has traditionally been. And they will establish the world and cause to inherit wasted heritages. That is colonialism. They will use prisoners. They will release prisoners to colonize these heritages. That is what they did. When the British first began to colonize North America, they took people who had been convicts, condemned to servitude, and they took them to America. And when the Americans revolted, the American Revolution, they sent Captain Cook around the world to find a suitable place to send the convicts to, and they found Australia. So Australia was also established at first for this purpose, and it seems that Isaiah was prophesying about this, and he is referring to the 10 tribes in this matter, and he also refers to the land of Sinim, that they will colonize the land of Sinim. So according to some, the land of Sinim is referring to Australia. And there are indications that this is correct, and there are other indications. And also it says that when the Jews in the end times, when the time is to come, begin to reunite, when the time comes under the Messiah, for the Jews to reunite with the 10 tribes, they will not know where they are coming from. They will not want to accept them. It says in Isaiah chapter 49, they will say, where did these come from? I was alone and persecuted and driven from country for country. Why did they not help me? That will be the reaction of the Jews. And the Zohar also refers to this. And he refers to this, indicating that it's the lost 10 tribes when they return. That is, the Jews at first will not want to accept them, or they will be loath to accept the idea that these people are their brothers from the 10 tribes of Israel. And we talk about those 10 tribes. We tell people that we're findings concerning those 10 tribes. And sometimes we come up with this reaction, even though on the whole, you can claim by history, you can bring a lot of evidence from many fields to show that, relatively speaking, compared to other Gentile nations, peoples whom we identify as belong to Western tribes were more decent towards the Jews than other peoples. And on the whole, they help them. On the whole, their record is positive. Nevertheless, it doesn't help those who may have suffered from them, or had relatives who did so, or some have picked up prejudice against them based on negative experiences that did take place, that even now take place. So that is the reaction that some people have, some Jews have, and this is the reaction that Isaiah describes the lost 10 tribes, the tribes of being faced with when they return, and how the Jews will greet them, or not want to greet them at first, and this is what they will be faced with. Nevertheless, there was a reconciliation. They shall be reconciled. They shall become one people, even though after becoming one people, they shall retain their tribal identity. Actually, their individual tribal identity will be strengthened. Ezekiel mentions that every person will be identified according to the tribe he belongs to, and that is even brought down as halakha, as a law, a written law in the Maimonides, in his book of law. He brings the Melech Messiah in the future will enable every Israelite to know which tribe he belongs to. So everyone will know which tribe they belong to, or some process will be set in place that would enable this. And this is what will happen in the future, that every Hebrew will know to which tribe he belongs and will adhere, settle eventually alongside his own tribe.
Glad to. How did you find out about our seminars? Are you on Yair's email list?
I'm on Yair's mailing list, so I get all the information that comes through, and that came through this morning.